Welcome to Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. We're in for a great night tonight. We've got our guest is coming live from Jerusalem tonight. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and he has gotten up at 3 o'clock, 3:30 this morning to be with us. I really appreciate him. He's a very interesting guy. We got a great topic tonight. We're going to be talking about the Kabbalah, which probably you've heard of, if nowhere else, the fact that Madonna got involved with the Kabbalah. As a matter of fact, she may have helped to popularize it in kind of a modern sense here in the Western world. My next week's guest I've got is Jessica Taylor. Jessica wrote a book, From Tragedy to Triumph. She survived brain damage and came back. It's just a really powerful story. She was scheduled to go on the Oprah show just before Oprah decided to close her show down, and so she didn't quite make it, but she's been on national radio and TV all over the world. So she's going to make a great guest next week. Be sure and join us, same time, same place. Our guest tonight is a musician. He plays with a group that believe it or not, takes the Kabbalah and the teachings of Rav Kook, into some pretty unusual places, and you'll enjoy it. Rav Kook wrote some really powerful poetry, and we'll get into some of his sayings a little later on. I wasn't familiar with this particular Kabbalist, and I'm really very impressed with what he has to say. It's very powerful. And before we get started, what I want to do is play a little snippet of Rabbi Itzhak Marmenstein. A little bit of his music, so that you can get an idea of what we're talking about. So if we're ready, Tom, you want to put that on for us?
Absolutely.
It's the good that I desire. Her broad expanses entrance me. Her lips, her roses I kiss. Her glorious vision exalts me. Absolute good, without limitation, without end.
All right, that's just a little snippet just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. At the end of the show, excuse me, we're going to close out a little bit early and play through that whole tune for you, for that whole piece. It's really a beautiful piece, so be sure and stick around after the show. I am ready to talk with Rabbi Itzhak. By the way, very interesting. I asked him, "Do you like to be called Rabbi, or do you like to be called Itzhak?" And he very humbly said, "Call me Rabbi once, and from then on it's Itzhak." So we'll be talking with Itzhak here. Tom, you got him on?
Yes, I do.
All right, I'm going to bring him on right now. Itzhak, how are you? Have I got you there?
Good morning. Fine, thank you.
It is morning, isn't it? Listen, before we get started, I need to ask you to turn your computer speakers down. It's feedback. It feeds back through here.
You did.
Good job.
Okay, I have to.
Okay, I think he's got it now, Tom. Yep. All right, good job. Itzhak, thank you for getting up so early in the morning, and it's you're a better man than I, sir. Tell me, for our viewers, give us an idea of what the Kabbalah is all about. What are we talking about when we're talking about the Kabbalah?
Okay, the Kabbalah is basically, the word means to receive. Now, I'm hearing myself, so give me 1 second to try one thing.
Yeah, it makes it a little hard.
Kabbalah means basically to receive, and it's the received understanding of the Torah's explanation of the nature of reality. The source of it is found in the revelation of the Torah, the scroll of Moses, or the 5 books of Moses. And the first 6 paragraphs are the narrative of the creation. And a large part of the Kabbalah is an explanation of the expansion and elaboration of the story of creation, of the narrative of creation. The whole tree of life and everything that it represents is derived from what we've been taught is the meaning of the creation narrative. And the other major source of information that Kabbalah expands on is derived from the vision of Ezekiel, in which the heavens open up and there is an extraordinary vision. So Kabbalah is basically the explanation and expansion of what that's all about.
So, okay, if I understand it right, and this is I think where science and spirituality kind of miss each other and really don't need to. There's a point where we have this oneness or this singularity, and there's no light, and then light bursts forth. Is that what the Kabbalah teaches?
Basically, it's that's the first thing that it said, that there was it was the divine presence.
Right.
And the divine presence decided to, as an act of good, to create an existence to share the good with. And we're the beneficiaries of that. And out of the divine field, out of the infinite, there was created a space within the divine for the finite to exist, but we're completely, as it were, held in the field of the infinite, and it's the genius of the Creator to create a space for finites to experience itself within the infinite.
Which is when you say finite, what you're talking about is you and I and the little bugs that crawl around, the birds, everything material. And if you were to compare that with science's language, you're talking about that moment of creation, that instant we call the Big Bang in science. And I think, there's some real similarity in that.
Very much so. The Big Bang is expressed in the Torah when it says, Yehi or, let there be light.
Exactly.
The first thing that came out of the Big Bang was light.
Right.
And that's in the scientific understanding as well. And the Torah is explicit about that. Let there be light.
So what's the initial? So we have that, and then creation comes along, and finally, after millions of years, God creates man. I guess after 7 days, if depending on how our calendar, God's calendar might be longer than ours, but man comes along, and so how does Kabbalah come in? I mean, how do we find out what's the origins of Kabbalah?
Well, Kabbalah's origins are basically to be found in the Torah. It's this secret. The Torah is understood on multiple levels simultaneously. There's a basic narrative there, and Kabbalah is the exploration of the secrets that it's contained within it.
Okay, perfect. You notice something? For our viewers' sake, Itzhak, it looks like we have, because you're in Jerusalem and we're here, we have an even longer delay in between times here than we normally have, and so, folks, that's just distance is causing that for us tonight. So, what are the foundations of the teachings of the Torah? I mean, what's all its underpinnings? What holds it all together?
What holds it all together is it's basically the tree of life. If you understand you've seen that chart of the tree of life with
yes.
the 10 points, and that basically says that Creator, out of unity, created multiplicity. The multiplicity is, in a sense, can be contextualized with an understanding that there's 10 root principles, and the tree of life represents the process between from vision to manifestation, with all the stations in between, from vision to manifestation. So that's the tree of life, and then that's just expansions and expansions on that. But the basic principle is that there is an underlying unity and a unifying principle that that has come out into this experience of multiplicity. But at core, it's a unity.
Okay, and I've had an experience with the Tree of Life here about 4 or 5 years ago. Have you had any real experience with that with the Tree of Life, or past just reading about it?
I'm not sure if perhaps not the sort you're describing. It sounds like a sort of a mystical experience. I've had my mystical experiences, but I have the experience of the Tree of Life at every moment, in the sense that we're here. I see reality, and I'm glad to see reality as the Tree of Life budding and blossoming and flowing in all the way that it does.
Right. Well, I want to share with you this little experience I had. I'll try not to take too long here, but it was very, very powerful for me. I was at a retreat up in northern Georgia at the foot of the Appalachian Trail, and we were doing some regression work where we would go back into as far back into our past as we could, and even did some past life kind of work. And there was a gentleman there from, he had been in Hawaii doing a show, or not a show, but a retreat of his own. But he had come to this retreat not to do anything other than to benefit from what we were doing at the retreat. But he said that on Saturday night he would show us some of what he did. And he was a physical therapist. And during his therapy, at some point, he was having some difficulty knowing what to do with a particular client, and a little voice told him what to do. And I'll make the story real short. At any rate, it started him working with the Tree of Life. And what he found out was that the Tree of Life needs to be square on us on our body. And if it's off kilter or so forth, then it causes some dissonance within our body. And I had an experience that really validated that particular night. So, you know, these mystical things can come down and be pretty, you know, right on in the middle of your life, and be quite surprising.
Well, I really appreciate that. I appreciate that because one of the things I've been blessed to be taught a system called Ophanim, and it's spelled Ophanim. It's you can find it online, which is a practice that comes out of the first book that explained the nature of the Tree of Life is called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. Right. And in that book, it describes the correspondence between the various points of the Tree of Life and the human body. And so they're very much part of they're very connected. And so this is a particular breath and visualization and meditation practice based on experiencing the Tree of Life in our very bodies and harmonizing it. And so I appreciate what you're saying, and I invite you at some point to try this practice, because you might then find it really excellent.
Well, yeah, I definitely will give it a try. As a matter of fact, just this conversation made me think I need to really bring this into meditation. So if you've got the Tree of Life, so if you have a practice, I'll have to, maybe you'll email me the information on that when you get a chance.
For sure.
Yeah, that would be great. So what I knew about the Kabbalah what I had read, and I have one of my friends here is one of my best friends is a Jewish fella that, but he's not really into the Kabbalah. He found it to be a little too much heady stuff, is what he said. Which I think early on that might be, but boy, if you get into it, it goes way past being heady and gets right down in the middle of your core. But what I learned was from Rabbi Luria from the 1500s, I think, somewhere. And also, and then the more modern Rabbi Berg out in California, who was the guy I think who hooked Madonna up in that end of it. Two big extremes as far as the Kabbalah is concerned, because Luria was like real deep into the mystical part of it, and I think Berg probably is too, but he's lighted.
Well, the whole thing followed because the Ari, the Isaac Luria, you mentioned, said part of the process of repairing the world requires that a deeper understanding of reality will emerge universally, and Kabbalah contains a lot of information and guidance that can be helpful in that, and it's meant to come out into the world. And so what the whole Rabbi Berg world represents, and there are better explainers of contemporary Kabbalah than they are, but they can serve as a helpful introduction. But that's Kabbalah. The fact that Madonna is doing it, I think, is God's sense of humor, and but I think she has good taste, and there's a reason that she's finding it worth the time and effort.
Well, sure, I think you're right. It's probably God's sense of humor. But on the other hand, I find that most of us, when we get into spirituality, we're really not ready for the deeper part of it. We just can't eat the steak. We want a little milk before we're able to digest all of that. And so I think that, that work that Berg does and the Madonna did, although it is Kabbalah light, still kind of, like you said, it's a really good introduction to where, people wouldn't have gotten it otherwise.
I agree, and God bless them all.
So what's interesting about Rav Kook is he was the first rabbi of I forget the term now of Israel. Am I right, or Jerusalem, or was it all of Israel?
Well, of modern state of Israel, or the modern
right.
He's the rabbi of the return to Israel, and he really follows Isaac Luria in a profound way, because Isaac Luria also, part of his teachings in the 1500s in Sat was that the repair requires the return of the children of Israel to Israel. And Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook, who here I have, if you can see that, a picture of him.
There you go.
And he was born in 1865, and and he was one of the first people to start speaking Hebrew as a spoken language, and then he came to Israel to serve as a rabbi here in 1904, and basically from that point on, in 1919, he became the chief rabbi of Jerusalem and then the first chief rabbi of Israel in 1921 until his passing in 1935. And in that time, he basically introduced the process by which Judaism will come back into living form in Israel. And also the seeds for the conversation that Judaism and the Jewish people are to have with the entire world as an act of sharing. And so he's really following in the footsteps of Isaac Luria, but bringing a lot of those seed teachings into manifestation. And part of what makes his writings important is that it's all based on Lurian Kabbalah.
That's what I read. That's what I
and before that, but it's in a language that's contemporary and doesn't contain all the scientific language of Kabbalah, and really offers it in a way that the spiritual seeker can find interest in it.
Well, that makes sense because in reading some of about him and some of what he had written, I just had the sense that Luria was involved there somewhere as far as what Luria taught. I want to do just share with our listeners. By the way, if for you folks out there that are watching and with us tonight, we would love to have you join our conversation. Tom is on the chat room that's right below the screen there. You can type in your questions. As a matter of fact, Tom, what's the number they can call on?
Yeah, you can call directly to us at 941-706-7905 if you have any questions or comments.
We'd love to have your call. I'm sure that Itzhak would welcome having you in the conversation. Itzhak, I want to share with our audience one of the quotes, and it's like piercing. It's one sentence that turns everything upside down. It's very powerful. Here it is. In truth, all darkness is merely diminished light. That's tremendously powerful.
Yeah.
Well, because when we think of bringing the light into the dark, and actually that's if you buy what he says here, what we're really doing is turning up the wick on the lamp. The dark and the light really aren't different; they just appear different.
Yes, they're in the same. In Sefer, the Book of Creation, it explains that there's a realm of, like, there's good and bad, but they're all in the same realm, and it's a matter of our understanding that yes, it is all one, and that the darkness is actually an illusion. That's an illusion.
Yeah. Well, what that really, you're one of the things you said early on was that it talks about in the Kabbalah that at some point the message would come into the world, into contemporary world, and I believe and I'm working toward. Yeah, absolutely, and I absolutely believe that, and I'm working toward that transformation in my own way. And I'll tell you what, Itzhak, and I've been a mystic for a long time now, and I was a mystic really before I knew I was a mystic. I kind of come into it sideways. I think the name just kind of attracted me at first, and but
yes, exactly.
But it started me in studying the mystics, the various mystics, and what I find is the commonality, the threads of truth that are running through all of them. Which only makes sense to me because I it's difficult at this point to see whether that it would be one mystic teaching that would become the umbrella for everything because the whole.
There's a beautiful teaching of Rav Kook that perhaps this might be a good time to share.
Uh-huh.
And it basically says, let me just find it here, that here, let me just give me 1 second here to find it. It's on this page where I thought it was, but the understanding is that everything is one, and we're all parts of the one. So each of us carries a particular facet of the one truth or the one reality,
right?
And we're here to share our experience and our understanding, and it's together that we can come to the unity of all that we're saying, and it's actually different languages are saying the same thing ultimately, and it's a matter of going past the seeming differences. It's interesting. Once before Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, what they saw is how much they're the same. Essence of my essence, flesh of my flesh. Once they ingested of the fruit, suddenly the first thing that they noticed was the difference between them.
Was the what?
And so we're still caught in that particular way of looking at things.
They noticed the difference between them. Is that what you said?
The understanding is to realize that the deeper reality is that everything is an expression of the one, and therefore, of course.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that religion in general does, and I think it's probably the way it was supposed to be, is it's exclusive rather than inclusive. And the beauty about
But that's part of the transition that we're hoping to go beyond, in which we can be uniquely ourselves. I don't think the process requires us to drop religion, but it's a matter of each person finding meaning in their life, while understanding that each person is also finding meaning in their life, and the religion is a way for the individual to grow, to sensitize. But if one understands it as teaching us to be any way negative towards another, we'll miss it. That's a huge mistake, and actually a desecration of the divine.
Absolutely, and it's that makes us is exclusive. That's the great part in my mind about mysticism, Itzhak, is that it's the great unifier. Every religion, major religion, has a mystical component, and I think that mystical component is what's going to allow for just what you're talking about, this new understanding, this new way to finally get past our differences and think that we're so excluded one from the other, and come to that knowingness you just said, that we're all one.
And fortunately, it's in many ways happening in
absolutely.
Of the business world. Ironically, is where we're seeing it. We're seeing for example, Bill Gates is one of those examples of someone who's really using their energy for good right now, that is philanthropic thing, and it's based on the recognition that the people in Africa are as important as the people here in the United States or Israel or wherever we are, and that are. And I think those sorts of activities, which are really a paradigm shift and a tremendous improvement, is an example of that understanding of the oneness of all life and of all humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. What's really pretty nice is that we're able to consciously take a part in that if we choose.
Well, that's what we're here for. We're here in order to consciously participate in the enhancement of life.
One of the things that Cook said that I found really interesting, and certainly it has played out this way in my life, he talks about evil and the fact that some evil is just, I'm not sure exactly how he says it, but basically he says it's kind of necessary. It does some other things that are necessary to bring all of this consciousness transformation about. Are you familiar with that part?
Well, it's a huge question. The nature of evil. If I could briefly, in Kabbalah, the basic explanation, according to the way Rav Kook explains it, is, first of all, the preface of it was that the potential for evil existed, and we decided we wanted to know it as well. The Creator said, don't eat of the fruit of tree of knowledge of good and evil. But we said, well, we want to know everything. And so we decided to bring in the knowledge of evil, and we probably misunderstood the challenge we were coming up with when we did that. But the good news about that understanding is that it's explicit that the source is all good, and that we have the capacity for it. It was a human action that brought in evil into our realm. And so all human action is repairable. And therefore, that action as well is repairable. And the process and the purpose of much of our history is to do the repair on the evil and its consequences that we brought in. And as we see our capacity to repair and bring improvement and more good into the world, we'll also see how extraordinary discoveries and extraordinary possibilities become available to us as well, as I think we in the technological realm, which is in a sense the physical is reflected in the spiritual. So there's great understandings that are coming and that we're all participating in. So I think it's a very exciting time, this time of our discovery of both the universal as well as the unity.
So tell me, how does the Kabbalah treat the idea of consciousness or life, if I don't know if life's the right word for it, after the death of the body?
After the death
Of the body.
the understanding is basically that in the same way that when we're born, we experience ourselves coming out of the restricted form of the womb into this physical experience where we can stretch and move and grow. It's similarly, once we pass this experience of in the finite realm, we have some expansion into the infinite realm, and there is the understanding that everything that happens in this particular realm becomes understandable to us, and we see how it was a function of the good and the so everything makes sense, and then it's some experience of the divine, because the root understanding is that the Creator brought us here for our well-being and in order to share love and to share the right. And so we become, after this, even more sharers of the light and the divine presence. So
All right.
generally, I have to understand to be quite glorious.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the Kabbalah really treats it as though, because in the human form, we still have this personal identity, for lack of a better term.
And all the veils of physicality and all that is stripped away, and we see the true nature of reality.
Well, but at the same time, in the words that you used, what I hear is that once through that veil, we still have some kind of a personal identity, some consciousness of self.
Well, it's a discussion actually of whether, to what extent we know or relate to ourselves individually. I think the understanding is it's not necessarily we identify with our own personal, I don't continue to see myself as Yitzhak Marmerstein, but I do, as part of the all-knowing, have a knowledge, so to speak, of my experience as Yitzhak Marmerstein, and all the various realms of it become understandable, and I see what it was that I needed to learn in order to grow and so forth. But it's not in any way of attachment. It's much more a function of understanding.
Right. Okay, very, very good. So what I'd like to do for a little bit here, and we'll come back to Rav Kook and to the Kabbalah, but I find you to be a very interesting guy, and the stuff that you're doing, I think, is really interesting, and you're really stepping up to the plate from what I can see and walking your talk, and that's really important. Tell us a little bit about how did all this get started? How did you get involved in the Kabbalah? Has it been something that you were taught as a child, or where did all that come from?
Well, my personal history is such that I was born in Israel in the early 50s, and my parents were Holocaust survivors. And I suppose one of the main things I took from that was that, this world is really capable of tremendous evil and tremendous harm, and the only possible response is to devote oneself to the good and to improve the world. And that began my search for both understanding of the real nature of reality and what I and what I could do to respond to the darkness by adding light. And that brought me into serious study of the Torah, Jewish studies, Jewish literature from the 1970s, and the whole process of learning the Torah and its literature, which includes the Talmud and various writings of Jewish philosophy and so forth. And along the way, I met the writings of Rav Kook, and I had a very strong connection to those writings immediately, and that became my focus. I first met Rav Kook's writings in 1981.
Did you have some kind of a spiritual experience that
sharing it with others and teaching and continuing to learn it, and I was also a student of a rabbi of you should play some of his music sometime, Shlomo Karabach.
Uh-huh.
And Shlomo Karabach was a rabbi who was a minstrel and taught with music.
Oh, really?
And it really was a pioneer in new Jewish music. And at one point, I also met the poetic writings of Rav Kook, and then decided to make a fusion between his teachings and to present them to the world musically, especially his poetry. In the last few years, that's what I've been focusing in on, is performing his poetry with various musical collaborations of musicians. I have one particular, and then a few years ago when I was in a festival in Toronto, I saw Greg Wall's Later Prophets perform the first album, which is based on, it's jazz based on the vision of Ezekiel.
This was in Toronto, you say?
And this was in Toronto, and then I asked him if he was interested in collaborating on the poetry of Rav Kook. And he said, well, let's look into it. And we started working with it. And that led to the CD we recorded and performances that we've been doing and hope to do widely all over the world.
Well, we found that Toronto is a real spiritual hub. There is just so much going on there, isn't there, Tom?
Absolutely.
We've talked to some really neat people that live in Toronto.
Sure.
Kat Forsley lives there. She's a musician and a mystic in her own right. And we have
Jeff Brown.
Jeff Brown is there. I think our next guest, Jessica Taylor's from there too, isn't she?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that that this all got started. Your thing got started there. Well, tell me, was there some kind of did you have some spiritual experience that spurred you into this? So many of us get this willingness to explore the deeper spirituality of our lives through pain, or it really starts to happen in our 40s. I think there's just this natural thing we start. But
well, I've had a few, I suppose, along the way. The first one I had was in 1973 when I first visited the Kotel HaMa'aravi, the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Much to my surprise, as I went there to pray, and I was 21 years old, and I was there in the plaza there, and as I finished my prayer, and it was just a simple, I don't even remember, it wasn't a formalized prayer of any sort. I had this, it was actually a type of vision of seeing a ladder of prayers, of people praying, emerging from the ground and going up to the heavens. And so that opened my eyes, like, wow, what's going on here? There is something real here.
Did
and
you
that started things off. In 1981, I was reading one Sunday afternoon from what I like to call the Cook book. It's the book of the writings of Rav Kook. And it's a book that's available. The translator is Ben Sion Boxer, and I really recommend people to get it. And I started reading it, and as I was reading a few lines, and I don't even remember which lines I was reading. It was a Sunday afternoon in Winnipeg Beach in Manitoba, actually. I was teaching Jewish high school there, and I read lines. For example, let me read you a few.
Yes.
The realm of mystery tells us you live in a world full of light and life. Know the great reality, the richness of existence that you always encounter. Contemplate its grandeur, its beauty, its precision, its harmony. And elsewhere he says, waves from the higher realm act on our souls ceaselessly. The stirrings of our inner spiritual movements are the result of the sounds released by the violin of our souls as it listens to the echo of the sound emanating from the divine realm. And as I was reading the writings of Rav Kook, I felt a tremendous expansion and a spaciousness of thought and really a breadth of thought that I knew I was very interested in, but I hadn't found its expression. And in his writings, I found an extraordinary expression of that, and I continue to.
I've had a similar experience to that myself. One of the things that I find really interesting is when I read St. John of the Cross. Are you familiar? The great Catholic.
No.
He's the great Catholic mystic. He was St. Teresa's mentor or father confessor, I guess. And of course, the Catholic mystic tradition is the contemplative orders. And when I read what he has written, when I read Rumi in the Sufi mystics, I hear very similar things. Things that any one of these authors could have written, and it just gives me this real sense that they had made that connection with the divine, that momentary unity with the divine, and that came through.
Yeah.
Which tends to give it real credibility. Pardon?
It's encouraging.
Absolutely.
It's available to all of us. The fact that some people are experiencing that is encouraging to all of us, and it's experienceable.
We've got we had a little lounge here in Sarasota. It was called the Down Under. It was right on the bay, the Sarasota Bay, and it was really down under, a big plaza that was there. And it was a little jazz bar and a really nice place. And I could easily picture you in this little jazz bar. And, in some of the videos I watched of you, it looked like you were doing your thing in a jazz bar. Am I right?
Yes, we're doing it in a jazz bar. We had a series of concerts in Israel this summer in honor of Rav Kook's 74th year of his passing. Every year in Jewish tradition, we honor and remember great sages as well as anyone who we were close to.
Right.
And we did a series of concerts in honor of his 74th year since his passing. And his 75th year since his passing is approaching, and we hope to bring this widely. So if you could recommend us to the Sarasota Jazz Bar, we'd be happy to be there.
Absolutely, we definitely be happy to do that. Well, I was telling Tom earlier, it's it would be pretty interesting to see somebody, like from the Catholic persuasion, in doing what you're doing, the songs and the poetry, in a jazz bar from St. Francis or one of the contemplative mystics. So I don't know of another group that does what you do. Are there others there in Jerusalem?
There's a tremendous renaissance here in music and Jewish music and the integration of the tradition and various verses of the tradition from them. And nobody's particularly doing this with the teachings of Rav Kook, but music with Jewish sources is flourishing here.
So I want to, if you don't mind, I want to talk about, and I still have some more I want to talk about with Rav Kook, but I want to kind of go off to the side here a little bit because I'm really curious. We watch what goes on in the Middle East. Everybody in the world has a huge investment there, huh? And where you live with, a guy like Ahmadinejad, in his bizarre ideas of, that the Holocaust never happened. How does all that feel, sitting right in the middle of all that, Itzhak? How does that?
Well, thank you for asking the question. It's both quite intense, and on the other hand, when you come here to Israel, you see that it's really flourishing here, and people are there's actually a tremendous level of happiness here that people are experiencing. There's a lot of beauty here, and just a lot of well-being, as well as a lot of challenges. So the understanding, there's some reason that the right of Israel draws a tremendous amount of darkness, and there's a history to that, and he's not the first, the expression of it now.
For sure.
Our teaching is that the Amalek, it's a teaching about Amalek, I don't want to go into the theology, so the thought behind it, but it's intense, and there's a reason that Israel is putting extraordinary efforts to ensuring our survival and well-being by our investment in our army and the military, and we have to be in a very, very high level of defensive functioning in order to continue living here well. Because he's a theoretical threat in the hopefully never, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of people, maybe, I don't know how a lot, it's the majority of people living here don't even wish anybody harm and don't wish Israel harm. And most Arab people living in this area, I think, would prefer if all of this stuff wasn't around, because there was a time when, in 1967, for example, when the Six-Day War and in the aftermath
Right.
of that, when there was a lot of the toxicity in the area around here didn't happen yet. There was for years real collaboration and cooperation between the Arabs and the Jews. It became politicized
Really?
by the students of the Mufti of Jerusalem, who began this actually in the 1920s. And Amina Dajab is a continuation of that. But this, we've been fighting this since the 1920s in the person of the Mufti of Jerusalem, and we continue to. So it's not new.
So what is your belief on the idea of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem? How does all that play? Does that play a part in?
Well, it's our understanding is that the temple will be rebuilt.
Are we talking about a
The
physical?
other understanding is that we're not to particularly. We're watching history unfold,
Right.
and seeing how history will enable that and bring that to being. In 1967, when we returned to the Temple Mount, in the months before that, everybody thought this was a very bad situation. People were sandbagging. Theologians were writing about God and the Holocaust, fearing a similar event. And then suddenly here we were, access to the Temple Mount and to the Western Wall, which we hadn't had since 1948.
Right.
And so we're watching history unfold, and our understanding is that as we improve ourselves, as we perfect ourselves, as we do more good, then the events of history will be such that the temple will come around again, and it could come out of tremendous cooperation between the children of Ishmael, and
Right.
we don't know how it will be. Rav Kook taught in 1908 in a letter that the brotherly love of Jacob and Esau, representing Judaism and Christianity,
Uh-huh.
and of Isaac and Ishmael, representing Judaism and Israel and Islam, the brotherly love will reassert itself above all the confusion and negativity of history. And the Roots teachings is that at core we're all brothers and sisters, and we'll come to understand that and live in a harmonious family and not in the opposite of that we're now experiencing.
Yeah, and I think our personal responsibility in that is when we're conscious of that, is to hold that space of light open for people to walk into. People that, like Ahmadinejad, you know, we don't know what might happen in his mind with a personal experience. Then everything could change in a moment. It doesn't appear
Of
that
course.
way. It doesn't appear
Of course,
that way.
right, though, you might be a little bit too optimistic thinking that he's going to have a change of consciousness, but the change of consciousness will happen.
Well, I hear that. I hear what you say, but yet isn't that what Rav Kook talks about? I mean, he talks about.
Well, of course, except you also have to recognize, Judaism is very clear that we have to recognize wrongdoing and respond to it and not allow it to flourish. And it's not necessarily by having a nice conversation, because that doesn't work. With a person like Hitler, what somebody needed to do was to kill him as soon as possible, and that's the moral imperative, as it may be in this case.
Well, I couldn't agree. I could not agree more. And I'm not suggesting that that all is going to be well if we try and just think it well. But I do think it's kind of important that we hold that potential open, that possibility open.
Of course.
I just seen so many things happen in my lifetime, it's like that I thought never were going to happen. I'll give you an example. The time that we grew up in, I you know, the 40s and 50s for me, the idea of going to the moon was like way out there somewhere, you know. And I thought, I used to think, boy, if that could only happen in my lifetime. Wow, and it happened how many years ago now? I mean, enough years ago that, you know, most of...
No, there's no limit to human potential and our capacity for creativity. And we're seeing it, you know, through the whole computer revolution and in so many ways. So it's exciting.
I've got, Tom just handed me a note that we have Lori on the chat who has a question for us. You want to share that, Tom?
Absolutely. The question says, history shows us that throughout the centuries, the most suffering was done by the Jewish people. How do you feel about that? And then the second part of the question is, how do you stay so faithful?
Huh. Did you get the question?
I'm listening to it now. Well, that's a profound question, and
Yes.
the suffering is not the entire reality. For most of the time, the Jewish people were in their own realms, thriving within their own experience. There were times when, for whatever reason, suffering occurred, but we had basically been quite good at creating a personal, familial, and social life that was meaningful and not full of suffering. People had challenges to deal with. And, of course, look, my mother was Swiss, so I know very much about the suffering that is possible and has happened. But if you come here to Israel and you see the level of well-being, we're really seeing what I'm seeing happening before my eyes is the manifestation of all the prophecies in the books of prophets about the return and the thriving and the rebuilding of Israel. I see that happening. So the suffering is not the major theme of history.
It's the resilience of humanity is amazing.
Of course.
Oh, it's Lori, that was a great question. Thank you. Anybody else got any questions?
That's
there?
all I've got at the moment.
I hope that that answered you, Lori. That was a pretty profound question. Really tough one. Let's go back a little bit, if you would, to I kind of want to end this on Rav Kook, because that's really what you wanted to talk about when you first contacted me. And from what I understand, he was really known for two things, major things. One was repentance. That was very strong. And the second thing was Zionism. Can you elaborate a bit on those two things for us?
The first one being repentance?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the understanding is that it's returning to your essential self, returning to your best self, returning to your higher self. For example, he writes that repentance emerges from the depth of being, from such a great depth in which the individual stands not as a separate entity, but rather as a continuation of the vastness of universal existence. Repentance is inspired by the yearning of all existence to be better, purer, more vigorous, on a higher plane. And within this yearning is a hidden life force for overcoming every factor that limits and weakens existence.
That's powerful.
Zionism is an expression of the return of the children of Israel to our ancestral homeland, and that's it's a tremendously positive thing. And so
you see that turns
the return to Israel is also part of the return to our best selves.
That kind of turns the idea of repentance around and makes it a more desirable kind of a quality. You know, often here, the idea of repent was pretty much, you'd hear that with hellfire and brimstone, which, you know, like put a lot of people off.
I can't relate to that. And the understanding in the Torah and Judaism is that God really loves us, and whenever we've done wrong, it's not anger. It's much more the desire for our best selves to flourish that motivates. So it's out of love that everything happens.
So, okay, I'll tell you what, I've got several other things I want to talk about, but as usual, the hour has gone pretty quickly, and I would like to give you a last minute here. We don't have a lot of time because I want to play your music on the way out. But I'd like you to, anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to kind of throw in here at this last minute?
Well, I think there's so much to cover, so that I can't imagine all of it. But I'm actually happy to let the music speak for itself. I invite people to read the writings of Rav Kook, and my email if somebody wants to follow anything up. And we're actually interested in bringing this poetry widely in all sorts of settings. So anyone's interested in it, feel free to invite us.
And we'll see if we can't promote that for you. Itzhak, we have enjoyed our time with you here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely enjoyed our time with you, and we'll talk again. And you have a good night, and thank you for getting up so early. Good night now.
It's my pleasure. Blessings to everybody.
All right. Remember, next week I've got Jessica Taylor, and this gal she's just a marvelous lady, and she is also a mystic. She kind of came to it late in life. That's not going to be the focus of our conversation, but I know that you will. This is a really gutsy gal that I think you will absolutely appreciate. Thank you for coming. We're gonna close out with some music, and you be sure to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week. Tom, you want to give us our little music?
It's the good that I desire. Her broad expanses entrance me. Her lips, her roses I kiss. Her glorious vision exalts me. Absolute good, without limitation, without end, constriction, or boundary, that does not separate from anyone alive. Good for without anxiety. Good forever, good right now, good for every people and nation. For all who seek for the good and not for the bad, and the light and the delight as the one is there. Good forever, good right now, good for every people and nation, for all who seek for the good and not for the bad, and the land